Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. John Stracks, a physician who focuses on the reduction and elimination of physical symptoms using mind-body medicine methods. And I'm here today with Ken Zych, an information technology leader who's now retired. And I first met Ken in 2010 when he came to see me when I was working at Northwestern and took one of my mind-body medicine classes. And I'm super excited for him to be here and share his story of healing with you today. Just a note before we get started, if you'd like to learn more about working with me or any of our staff, please visit our website at cormendyhealth.com. And Ken, thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure.
So it's easy to remember when I first met you because I will never forget that you were in my class the night of Snowmageddon in Chicago on January 31st of 2011, which was the first night I ever did anything through telehealth because rather than meeting in person, we all met on the phone. And so that was a long time ago now. Over 12 years ago. And so it may be hard to remember even back that far, but I think for people who are listening, it's helpful to set the stage of what you were experiencing back then and where you had been. So can you give us some background about what life was like for you in the 2000s?
Well, what led me to discover Dr. John Stracks was the end of many years of searching for a solution to pretty severe low back, left hip, left leg pain. I had tried many different things over a span of several years. And in fact, the real first symptoms appeared even in the mid 90s. I won't go back that far today, but on and off, I experienced classic sciatica symptoms and sought different solutions, lots of exercise, chiropractic, and it came and went. But then, probably around 2008, symptoms returned with kind of vengeance and were more severe and they didn't go away. And it was kind of a lifestyle that involved some degree of pain. And I've said many times it was just bad days and worse days. As far as the pain, it was always present and it had come to dominate my life. And after a couple of years, literally a couple of years, and 13 doctors and all kinds of different treatments, I was at the end of the road and I was pretty desperate. And the way I found out about Dr. Stracks was my wife happens to work in our local library. She brought home a book. I looked at it and I said, that's not for me. That doesn't make any sense. And I pushed it aside. But I later read that book called Healing Back Pain Now by
Dr. John
Sarno. Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Dr. Sarno. And things changed immediately for me. I had a new understanding that there could be an emotional source to my pain instead of physical, because the important part of my story was, despite all the trips to many different doctors and imaging of different varieties, there was never any physical deformity. I didn't have any ruptured discs. I didn't have any arthritis. There was nothing physically wrong that anybody could see through imaging, yet I had terrible pain.
Do you remember what the pain was like on a daily or monthly basis for you back then? Was it mostly in your back or your legs?
Primarily, there was some low back pain, but I think that was more from stiffness or your body adjusting to accommodate for the pain on my left side, but it was terrible, terrible pain, primarily in my left thigh. Classic burning sciatica, and it would vary greatly with movement, activity, tingling down in the foot, burning in the foot, you name it. I have kind of a dry, sarcastic sense of humor, I've been told, and I would tell my wife, red hot knitting needle day. That's what it felt like in the back of my leg, burning pain. And some days it was better, some days it was worse, but it was nearly always present. So I was always conscious of where I'm going to have to sit and for how long, whether it be at work, in meetings, car trips, airplane, church, you name it, movie theaters. I was like, where am I going to sit where I'm going to be comfortable, or can I stand somewhere? Standing was relief, not disappearance of symptoms, but it's less painful.
Yeah. And so you had gone to see 13 different practitioners. What else did you do back then to try to relieve the pain before you read Dr. Sarno's book?
Well, it was all of those practitioners, orthopedics, neurologists, chiropractic. I love exercise. I'm a very active person, so it wasn't hard to get me to do strength training or stretching. But, I was strong and flexible,
Mhm,
but the
mhm.
pain didn't go away. So, but to get back to really what's in my story, the fall of 2010, and I read that book, and I felt he was writing about me, about long, painful symptoms, no physical evidence, bouncing around different doctors with no relief. And after doing some pretty intensive research about Dr. Sarno and other people, I ultimately found Dr. Stracks in Chicago, somewhat in my backyard. I live in the Chicago suburbs, and so that's how we met. And as he referenced, he held his first class. It was just, I think, three or four of us, and
Yep.
yeah, the last class was during the classic Chicago blizzard that year.
21 inches in 21 hours, I think it was.
Yes, it was
So,
a doozy. It really
yes.
was.
And so you learned about that. You read Dr. Sarno's book. You recognized some of the personality traits and the fact that you hadn't had any abnormalities on imaging. Are you able to think back to that time and remember how you started to get better?
Well, the very first was the reading in black and white that there's a connection between physical pain and emotional sources. I'd never heard that. It made immediate sense. Think about, you're embarrassed, your face turns red. That's a physical to emotional response.
Yep.
You're stressed about a presentation and you get an upset stomach. Now someone's telling me about childhood issues, life issues, work stress, life stress, and my body is diverting tension from that to something else to distract me from it. And it clicked immediately. And that's where the real healing started, was just simply the awareness of that.
Mhm. And then, do you remember what happened from there? So you had the awareness, you sought me out, you had a consultation with me, took my class. And so, what kinds of strategies did you use back then to help yourself move forward and calm down the pain?
Well, the main things were, other than just the, let's call it, the book knowledge of understanding the medicine and the science, and then going from there to a lot of different exercises to identify, by physically writing this stuff down in this big giant workbook and working through things to peel back the layers to understand your personality traits and triggers, emotional triggers, and start to, again, identify all of that and make the link between those emotional issues and how the brain behaves. So from that, and then the biggest benefit I feel I got, because I did it the most, was journaling.
Mhm.
I have the, up on my bookcase right here, I have the notebooks still that are filled with my writings up here from back then, that over the years I've thumbed through and referenced cluster writing and some other things.
Yeah, free writing, cluster writing. I got a colleague, Dr. Howard Schubiner, who does some work with us now. He's got a book called Unlearn Your Pain, and we probably used that as a basis for some of the things that we were doing. And so it was about brainstorming and putting
Yes,
some
yes.
ideas on paper and writing about stressors and thoughts and feelings and writing letters.
Yes, yes, all of that, doing something physical, thinking it through and doing something very physical was almost like releasing it, kind of letting it out of his cage and getting rid of that. That was incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
Also, some of the other books and materials that I had read from Dr. Schubiner and Dr. Sarno. I'm a list person. I love lists. So I would copy out some of these reminders and these tips and strategies. I would keep those little lists and reminders handy for a while, probably for the first year or maybe 18 months. I referred to those things fairly regularly,
Mhm.
just to remind myself kind of my journey and some of the real more key things, the way to reorient your thinking and literally retraining your mind. I
Mhm.
love one of the presenters. I don't know if it was you, Dr. Stracks, or where it came from, but the idea of a path in the grass that you keep walking down it, and that path gets worn into the grass. And that's what I came to understand happened with me between emotional issues and physical pain, that that's a neural pathway that was burned into my system. And I simply had to abandon the old one and create new ones. And that image, very powerful, or that understanding about how the human body operates.
Mhm. And do you remember, were there specific stressors that were going on in your life that you think potentially contributed to the pain and symptoms? Or was it more, it got started and the uncertainty and the worry about it kept it going? Do you remember kind of what you thought was the underlying cause?
Suffice to say that back then, when I was working with you, I identified a lot. And I think just in human nature and in general, if somebody asks you to describe something, the two or three or four most impactful things. If you ask somebody to describe, there's all of us are going to have. So what I'm saying is, the 80% would have come out, I think, the most impactful.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever I said, it was job or family history or being a father, being a husband, whatever I identified or childhood issues. All I'm saying is, I believe that whatever was most impactful to me in an emotional sense, that would have been the short list.
And it wasn't so much that there were things that were way hidden under the surface. You didn't have to sort through that much what these things were, but really making that connection, which, like you said, that was the first time you had heard that these things could go on in your life, whether they're work related or family
Sure,
related or anything
sure.
else, and show up in your body. That was the important part for you.
Correct. That was the proverbial aha. Now we've now we've got something.
Yeah. And my memory, the journal writing was really helpful and important for you. Do you remember, was there a meditation component to
I
it
knew you
also?
were going to ask me that. There was. I tried it. It wasn't for me.
Okay.
It wasn't for me. I got enough out of it. I did do it though,
Hmm.
but that wasn't something I continued.
Hmm.
It just wasn't my thing. I think I probably benefited at the time, but I I stuck with I liked the physical aspect, and
Hmm.
like I said, they're right here in front of me.
Hmm.
It's not like I look at them, but every day. But let's just say once a year, I notice them, and I just flip through it, and it's a validation of the healing that has occurred and how it occurred. More importantly,
Hmm. And you actually took out a pen and paper, right? You didn't type it out on
notebook,
computer and yeah,
spiral notebook, page after page after page.
yeah. And so in that time after you and I met and you took that class, my memory is that you kept gradually getting better, feeling less pain. I think getting back to activities, correct? And exercise.
Absolutely. I had stopped running because physical pain, you're a runner, it's kind of punishing on the body. So I had stopped right around the time I met you and probably didn't run for about 6 months, which really bothered me,
Mm-hmm.
not getting that level of activity. But at some point, you said, try it, start. And thing was, the curious thing in my health history was being a distance runner never made my condition work. That was always lurking. How come I can do this and I don't feel worse?
Mm-hmm. Mhm.
that never, there was never an answer to that question.
Right. And it's important to recognize those kinds of discrepancies, people who are
Yes,
working on this, when you start to see that some of these pieces don't fit. If you were really injured in that way, you wouldn't be able to run 5 miles. Or a lot of people will find that the pain's really bad at work, but not when they're at home, or it's bad on the weekends and not so much in the week. And so
sure,
start to poke holes in this purely physical explanation, and
exactly,
that's what helps people move forward.
exactly.
And so I have a memory in probably late 2011, so it was about a year or so after we met, that you and I had a conversation about how you had done really well and were probably 80% better, but I think you had stalled out at that point.
Sure,
You may or
sure.
may not remember this. But in my memory of it, we talked about all the things that you were doing, a lot of journal writing, a lot of education, a lot of reading, maybe some meditation, and that you were putting in a lot of time each day, like hours a day in
Yep,
my
yep.
memory again. And and the question was, what else could you do? And so interestingly, I use you as a previously
Hmm.
anonymous, now not anonymous example of someone who had to learn to try softer
Correct.
instead of trying harder, because in my memory of it, the answer for continued improvement was to spend less time working on it rather than
Right.
more. Do I have that? Is that
Yes.
memory fairly
Maybe
accurate?
the time, I think it was a little, I, I, I think the time frame between when we stopped the formal in person and the famous Blizzard phone call, I think
Mhm.
it was more like 6, 8 months
Okay.
when at first, fall of 2010, I read that book and I got literally immediate relief. And then the journey began. And then working with you, it was like these big plateau, right? But decrease in symptoms.
Right.
And then I plateaued for a very long time and I'm working and working and frustrated and it's not getting any better. And you said, don't try as hard.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Mhm.
again, the more important thing was I kind of let go of it and my symptoms further decreased. I
Mhm.
didn't like walk away from this approach or this therapy. I
Mhm.
just didn't try. In my case, I felt I had gotten so much out of the process that I could let go of the process
Mhm.
somewhat for a
Mhm.
while.
Mhm.
And I improved more from that. It was kind of like the last little bit of discomfort and my symptoms went away after a period of time.
Yeah. And I think part of it was that you had all the knowledge that you need. You had uncovered what you needed to uncover. You had written out what was being held inside. And there was a trust piece to it, that you
Yes,
knew what you needed to do and you didn't have to spend so much time focusing on it, and instead could go focus on what you needed to do with physical activity and family responsibilities and work and everything else.
exactly. Exactly.
And so, what's life been like for you since then? And so that was talking about roughly a year's time frame between first learning that there's this mind-body connection and really feeling like you could do what you wanted to do physically. And so for the last decade, do you get flare-ups ever? Is there ever any pain, or what's your life like now?
I, I I would say over life today is awesome. I'm very blessed and retired, have a lovely wife and family. So everything in that regard is great. But with respect to, the symptoms and the amount of time I had to manage or put into them gradually kind of decreased. Initially, I think there were flare-ups. Maybe I was experiencing more stress
Mhm.
at work or wherever, whatever the source of that was, and I had more flares. As the years went by, the frequency, duration, intensity of those flare-ups just kind of drifted to where there were a couple of times I told my wife, I said, I haven't even thought about this for a year.
Mhm.
We got to the point where years or a couple of years passed where I didn't even think about the fact that I used to have this terrible leg pain or that I went through this process. So that in general describes, you know, how 12 years have gone by is that has moved into the background of my life.
Mhm.
I periodically get this discomfort in my left leg,
Mhm.
primarily when I'm sitting,
Mhm.
but I don't get scared. I don't get worried.
Mhm.
I think it is so ingrained in my head that it just, I can think about it. I don't want to minimize if there's any kind of trick or anything I'm talking about. I just think because of my experience in the path that I've been on, it's enough to acknowledge, yeah, my leg's little sore, but that's it. I move on.
Mhm. And one of the things that I've heard you say before is that that process of noticing the soreness and moving on hardly takes any time at all. Once upon a time, when you were first learning, it may have been, let me get out the journal, let me write about this, let me try to figure out what's going on under the surface. But that these days, with your confidence on it, you notice it, you acknowledge it, and then you go do what you need to do.
Right, right. A couple of times, a handful of times I have either pulled out, like I've mentioned, my journal notes or flipped through some of these books. Again, it's just the validation of what I went through. And it's a tool. When Dr. Stracks has asked me to come and join some of the sessions, and I've spoken a couple of times, I talk about how I feel like I was given these tools to manage this. And it has worked tremendously in my
Yeah.
case.
And exercise wise, you do what you want to do these days, no
I
limitations.
I do. Just happily retired 61-year-old. I'm be a little bit slower. I can do just about anything I want physically with, yeah, yeah. I'm in great shape.
Any other thoughts for people who are listening and struggling? And so what happens is that, some people pick up a book and it really makes a lot of sense right away, and some people move forward quite quickly, and other people takes a while for the ideas to sink in, or they do the journal writing and everything else, and there's not much movement at first. So any thoughts or encouragement for.
Sure. And that's kind of my favorite question to answer. And one of the things that has really struck me through this whole process, going back to when I sat with these two other men and Dr. Stracks and heard them talk about their stories, and then the handful of times that I was invited either to just join a group that the doctor was having an informational system or a session, or when I was speaking, everyone's situation is different and unique. And I'm picturing my mind listening to this woman talking, going, no, that's not right. That's got nothing to do with it. And then I'm going, wait a minute, that's her story. So the way this developed was different, unique life experiences, and what I learned, what I heard this person say, and this person, what worked. Maybe this other person said they relied solely on meditation, and the writing did not work for them.
Mhm.
So we're all these wonderfully unique human beings, and the fact that my progress went as rapid as it did, and then where I did not have to deal with this on a daily basis after a very short period, I think I'm in a very special category like that, where I don't have to work at it simply based on what I've heard other people say. So I think that's very important, that what worked for me hopefully works for other people, but the understanding and the belief that these issues have an emotional source, if you accept that and start to feel healing and improvement from there, you are now on the highway to healing. And your journey is going to, everybody's journey is going to be different. So if you've tried this and you're working on it for a couple of years, well, my heart goes out to you. Please keep going. It's real.
Mhm.
So it's unique, but your experience is going to be unique, but the process and the tools that are available through Dr. Stracks and others, that's what's important. Use the tool that makes the most sense or the one that you got the relief from. Like I said, in my case, it was the writing and the reading and the list and reminding myself of these things about how the brain works, the emotional issues.
I
It
think there's
was,
a lot of wisdom in that, and I will tell people regularly, as much as I want there to be one pathway forward
yeah,
for everybody,
yeah,
everybody's got this slightly different
yeah,
pathway.
yeah.
And the first step is the understanding, this recognition that the mind and body are connected and it shows up in the human body. And then the second part, as you say, for some people, it's uncovering things that haven't been said. For other people, it's becoming quiet and meditative and reflective.
Right,
For other
right.
people, it's working on important relationships. And everybody finds what the issue is for them and how to address that. And that's how people move forward.
One more thought. And I actually had this thought earlier this morning. This isn't like you have a sinus infection and you go and you get an antibiotic. That's what we want, right? That's what I
Mhm.
wanted for
Yeah.
my leg
Yeah.
pain was
Yeah.
somebody to go, ah, here's your problem. But if you accept the emotional, physical link, there's not a pill, folks. You have to work at it. And the way you're going to have to work at it is going to be it's your path and your journey. So we want, we live in a world where we want answers to everything immediately. Put that expectation aside. That's not this environment. That's not what we're dealing with here. You're going
Right.
to have to unravel your own background, how this condition developed for you. So
Yeah. It's a
it's
very different model of healing than we see in the medical system very much based on sinus infections and strep throat, and this is about self-exploration and understanding and infrequently trying softer instead of trying harder.
sure, sure.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other thoughts for people who are listening and working on this before we end?
Um, Gosh, I've said the things that are most important to me, but again, view it as a unique process. And you'll learn about a collection of tools and ideas, and some of those ideas may be more impactful, and some of the techniques may be more impactful. Be patient and believe in it, and in that because of the fact that we're unique, the way you come through your healing process is going to be different. But it is, I hope through my example, it is very real. It's very real.
Hmm. So we'll end there. Thank you for being here and sharing your story and talking about it.
Absolutely.
And I know how helpful it is.
Hmm.
You and others who have done well have talked about how helpful it was to hear people before you share their stories and talk about successes. And so thank
Absolutely.
you for being here and sharing.
I'm very glad to help. Good luck to anybody who goes down this path.
So, and as I mentioned before, anybody who wants more information about our practice and working with me or the staff here at Cormendi can check out our website, cormendihealth.com, and get in touch with us. Our staff will get back to you with all the details that you need to know. Thank you for being here and listening. Every time we record, I recognize how lucky I feel to be part of this community of people who are working hard on healing in brave, creative, and cutting edge ways. So with that, we will end. Take care, everybody.
Great. Bye bye.